Well, here's the lowdown. 1 barrel is exactly 42 US gallons of crude oil. That's approximately 159 litres. But a barrel as such no longer exists. These days it's simply a notional measurement, the history of which dates back 120 years, way before oil was transported in tankers like this. So what's in it? Typically, that notional barrel of crude North Sea oil will be refined to give almost 5 litres of LPG, almost a full tank of petrol for a family car, 40 litres of diesel, or enough kerosene to move a jumbo jet for just over a mile. And even after all that, there's still about 12% left, which can be used to produce electricity. And here's the hard bit. The term, a barrel of oil, can also be applied to a specific measure of how much energy is released when you burn a barrel of oil. Here's the equation. The next key element in understanding Scotland's relationship with oil is understanding why the price of oil keeps going up and up. Before this investigation, I thought it was because oil was running out. But the experts think there's another factor at work.
Pure speculation, in the main. Some elements of supply and demand, some elements of the increasing cost of getting oil out of the ground. But if we take those two factors into account, and only those into account, then the $100 a barrel oil should be nearer 35 to 40. The rest is the speculator's gain.
Peter O'Dell isn't the only person to think it's the speculators. The minister responsible for oil in the UK, Malcolm Wicks, acknowledges it too.
When I talk to OPEC ministers about this, their view is that supply is not the problem. They argue there's plenty of supply at the moment, and it is all about psychology. Someone might say madness in the markets. They say it's about speculation. I personally think the fundamentals are the things to emphasise, but clearly, like many other issues, there are a number of factors now behind the record price of a barrel of oil.
So according to O'Dell and OPEC ministers, the main reason why oil is so expensive is because so many people want to take a punt on it and on how high the price will go. He's adamant that it has little to do with reported shortages.
We have a world which is replete with oil resources to a degree that now far exceeds that of any other time. Taking the last 10 years as an average of increasing use of oil over this period, one finds that the annual rate of increase is only just over 1% per annum, 1%. And this is the longest period since the end of the Second World War that there has been so little global increase in demand for oil.
No shortages because of demand. What about supply?
Over the past 10 years again, one looks through the declaration of proven reserves, which are those reserves which are thought to be available at current costs and current prices. One finds that there has been a continuing increase in the availabilities of oil, resources, the reserves, of the order of 2.5% per annum. And so we now have more oil which has been declared as being in the ground than ever before. And it's roughly the equivalent of 44 years of the current rate of demand. So there's a lot of oil to go, even if no more is found.
There's still huge amounts of resource of oil and gas left in the North Sea and the wider UK continental shelf. My guess would be that we'll still be exploring and extracting oil and gas, certainly for the next 4 decades, maybe beyond that.
All this sounds like very good news for Scotland and our oil industry. As long as the price is rising, every barrel in the ground is becoming more valuable. So it makes perfect economic sense to go after it. Someone who knows well the economics of oil is a politician and former economist. At the Royal Bank of Scotland, he launched an index to track Scotland's oil industry, and the bank's still using it today. He's Scotland's First Minister, Alex Salmond.
Well, all oil provinces go up and down with the oil price. I think it would be a reasonable suggestion, unless you want to turn the laws of supply and demand and likely forecasts on their head, that we can safely assume, for the sake of argument, that the average price of oil and gas over the next 30 years is going to be substantially higher in real terms than it's been over the last 30 years. And although, of course, it is true that you're into areas of higher cost of exploration, and of course the intense activity bids up the price of resources, you're still talking about a very comfortable margin in terms of viability.
If the economics are looking good for the oil companies, could the future be looking good for Scotland and those employed in our oil industry? Drilling for oil is about taking risks. A high oil price makes those risks more worthwhile. Someone who's taking plenty of risk in the North Sea is Oil Exco's Chief Executive Arthur Mulholland.
Last year we drilled 39 out of 120 exploration and appraisal wells drilled in the UK sector. In 2004, we were paying approximately $55,000 a day for a drilling rig. Today we're paying $350,000 a day, and these are American dollars, which is priced in. So even though the price of oil today is higher than it was in 2004, our costs of doing business have increased just as dramatically.
Once they've found the oil, it still takes years to produce it. John Gallagher from Shell explains how far into the future they plan.
Our industry makes investments on a 10, 20, 30-year horizon. And so look at that horizon of profitability, and you will quickly find that you get into levels of profit margin that might be 10 to 15%. That's not too different from your average industry.
There's obviously a lot of money to be made in the North Sea, but who benefits most? The oil companies, governments, or ordinary people like you and me? Well, to answer that, I need to find out how successive governments have negotiated with the oil barons. Someone with an insider's perspective is Gavin McCrone from the Scottish office.
On the whole, we had, I think, very good relations with them, and especially the British ones, BP and Shell. Some of the American ones, we got on fine with them, but it took them a while to adjust to the way in which we operate in this country.
Once again, the story of North Sea oil reflects the politics and culture of the country. In 1976, the hue of the country was definitely socialist, as Tony Benn decided to create a national oil company headquartered in Glasgow.
A lot of people said, you mustn't frighten the oil companies away. But I knew quite well that I couldn't I didn't want to frighten them away, but I couldn't frighten them away because they desperately needed the oil. It was just fairly soon after the oil crisis of 1973. I would talk to the oil companies. For example, Esso wouldn't cooperate with me. And I said, well, this is what we're trying to do. And they said, well, we're not going to do it. So I said, OK, doesn't matter. So they didn't get any oil. So a year later, the president of Esso came back and invited me to lunch. So I had a word with him. I said, how's your golf? How's your wife? Didn't discuss oil with him. And he was absolutely terrified because he needed the oil and I had the oil. So I was then in a position, you see, to lay down the conditions under which they could have bits of the North Sea.
This was a bold move at the time. 30 years ago, there were hardly any nationalised oil companies. Today, state-owned corporations hold 4/5 of the world's oil, so the trend definitely caught on. While Tony Benn was dealing with the oil companies, his press secretary Bernard Ingham was also learning about the intricacies of negotiation.
Well, the oil companies are used to dealing with governments. They have to deal with government. And of course they would exercise the usual little bits of sophisticated blackmail, which say, oh, we're going to be disappearing over the horizon if we are taxed anymore. And all this was a wonderful game of poker. And you knew what the objective was, to achieve a balance whereby they stayed and we got some more money.